I came home expecting a normal day. What I found instead shattered my entire world. My wife's betrayal was just the beginning, and by the time it was over, none of our lives would ever be the same. Even with my borderline social difficulties and the fact that I had to repeat a grade in elementary school due to the underfunded school system in my neighborhood, I never struggled when it came to personal relationships. I grew up in a lower middle class area, though I can't say for sure if that had any impact on my experiences. What I do know is that during my college years, I was surrounded by many attractive women my age. I continued living at home, not out of necessity but because one of the top 5 engineering universities in the world was just a 10-minute drive from my house. Throughout high school and community college, I spent a lot of time helping academically driven women in my area with their studies, assisting them with homework, take-home exams, and breaking down complex subjects. In return, they offered me guidance on personal and intimate matters. This arrangement was mutually beneficial, leading to a deep sense of fulfillment for both me and the women I mentored, who were typically between the ages of 18 and 21. I became known for my patience, intelligence, and discretion, which earned me numerous recommendations. My ability to connect with them on an intellectual level helped me explain academic concepts clearly, and that same skill made our more personal exchanges smooth and natural. In all of my interactions, I was respectful and considerate, always ensuring that the details of our meetings remained private. Though I suspected they might have shared their experiences with one another, I never confirmed it. Over time, I had intimate encounters with 11 different women, often meeting with several of them multiple times. However, none of these relationships ever evolved into anything romantic. The dynamic between us was purely transactional, an exchange of knowledge in ways that suited both our interests. Among the women I encountered, one stood out, someone who went by the nickname Jezebel, not her real name. Unlike with the others, I failed to show her the same level of gentleness, though not because I lacked the desire to be kind. Jezebel was my age, tall and strong. While she wasn't overweight, she carried most of her extra weight in her upper torso and muscular thighs. Her face was unremarkable by conventional standards, but those who knew her, myself included, often compared her figure to that of a goddess. For anyone who didn't have a preference for petite women, Jezebel's physique was the epitome of perfection. She had a naturally seductive aura, embraced her intimate life fully, and had no difficulty attracting partners. Beyond her striking physical presence, she possessed an energy that made her impossible to ignore. Jezebel was heavily involved in multiple softball and basketball leagues, balancing her athletic pursuits with an ambition that set her apart. While she wasn't the most academically inclined, she was far from unintelligent. In fact, her aspirations exceeded those of many people I knew. Her ultimate goal was to establish her own studio or website catering to adult content. To help her achieve this, I provided tutoring in math and business fundamentals, ensuring she had the skills necessary to navigate the industry she wanted to enter. At one point, Jezebel confided in me, something I believed wholeheartedly, that I was the only person she allowed to have an unprotected intimate relationship with. She claimed she trusted me because she was certain I was free of any sexually transmitted diseases. Regardless of the precautions I took, she genuinely seemed to enjoy our encounters. Whether she was merely playing into the moment or experiencing true pleasure, she always responded with an uninhibited primal scream, assuring me afterward that it had been incredible. Unlike the other women I had been with, Jezebel never requested academic assistance in exchange for intimacy. This distinction made my time with her particularly memorable. I vividly recall the 6 times we were together, each encounter leaving a deep impression on me and subtly shaping my social awareness. One evening, she called me unexpectedly and suggested we spend the night together. Without hesitation, I made my way to her apartment, where she welcomed me with her usual warmth. Though I never fell in love with Jezebel, she held a special place in my life. I cared about her deeply and was willing to help her in any way I could, without expecting anything in return. During my senior year of college, I developed a high-tech, encrypted proximity sensor that functioned similarly to the EasyPass system used on toll roads in the United States. The system was designed for secure access and could be easily programmed for various applications. Over time, different versions of my invention were adopted by corporations with private security networks, multiple state and federal agencies, and even branches of the military. This innovation led me into the complex world of patenting my own technology, opening doors to opportunities one hadn't previously considered. To bring my inventions to market, I had to obtain a security clearance. The success of my patented technologies generated substantial revenue through royalties, which allowed me to establish 2 companies, one focused on product distribution and the other on research and development. Lacking managerial experience and preferring to concentrate on innovation and design, I instructed my legal team to create a complex network of shell and holding corporations to oversee the operations of my businesses. While I retained full ownership of the primary holding company, unraveling the structure required a deep level of financial expertise and considerable time. Though some of my companies were strategically registered offshore for asset protection, I never used them to evade taxes. Only the CEOs and financial directors of my two active companies were aware of my ultimate authority. To everyone else, I was simply the head of new product development at one of the firms. This allowed me to maintain a degree of anonymity while steering the future of my businesses from behind the scenes. By the time I turned 24, I had built a solid foundation for my career and financial security, and I was finally ready to pursue a serious relationship. However, the journey wasn't easy. My struggles with borderline social anxiety made forming connections difficult, and I could no longer rely on my intelligence alone to attract a partner. Despite these challenges, I remained persistent, exploring various online platforms and attending social gatherings in the hopes of meeting someone special. At 26, I finally did. Her name was Allison, and she was, without a doubt, the most stunning woman to ever reciprocate my feelings. Not only was she breathtakingly beautiful, but she also possessed an incredible figure, qualities that captivated me from the start. Looking back, I realized that our relationship, though seemingly ordinary, was far more superficial than I initially believed. I had been so enamored with her looks, particularly her striking physical attributes, that I overlooked other qualities that truly matter in a partner. One thing that stood out over time was her complete lack of interest in my work. While I was passionate about my innovations and the businesses I had built, she never asked about them, never seemed curious. At first, I didn't think much of it. But as the relationship progressed, her indifference became impossible to ignore. Allison never displayed the slightest curiosity about my work. Whenever I brought up my job, she either feigned confusion or quickly changed the subject, as if the details didn't interest her at all. Surprisingly, this very indifference worked in her favor when it came to the prenuptial agreement. Gail, a highly respected attorney who had helped me structure my corporate holdings, strongly advised that I sign a prenup. Though I hesitated at first, Gail was adamant, so much so that she made it clear she would no longer represent me if I failed to present the agreement to Allison before the wedding. Ultimately, she drafted a straightforward prenuptial contract, ensuring that my assets remained protected. For a week, I wrestled with the decision. The sum of $225,000, an amount specified in the agreement, seemed insignificant to me, and despite the fact that Allison's career interests were questionable, I found myself still drawn to her. A week later we met again, and this time she was even more breathtaking than before. She had dressed provocatively, emphasizing her flawless figure, one I had admired since my college years. Her face and hair seemed even more radiant, giving her an almost mesmerizing presence. As soon as our coffee arrived, I handed her the prenuptial agreement. Here, your passage seems to shift abruptly into discussing someone named Whitney. Based on context, it sounds like a transition to talking about a different person, possibly a daughter or another important figure in your life. Below is how I transitioned smoothly while maintaining clarity. Years later, I would come to appreciate intelligence in a different way. My daughter, Whitney, inherited a level of brilliance comparable to mine, scoring just as high on aptitude tests, but she far surpassed me in social skills. Even at the age of 10, she possessed a striking appearance, though she had also inherited some of my less remarkable features. However, what truly set her apart was her kindness, compassion, and deep empathy. Whitney had an undeniable presence, one that could brighten any room she entered. Not only was she beautiful, but she also displayed remarkable intelligence, effortlessly connecting with people in ways I never could. She had a natural ease with children and was constantly engaged in various classes and activities, always seeking to learn and grow. The time I spent with my children always felt more meaningful than anything else. After nearly 15 years of marriage, I had built a life with Allison and our 3 wonderful kids, a life I truly valued. But everything changed on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. I was driving home from the airport after a quick one-night business trip. It was around 1 p.m., and despite informing Allison of my entire schedule in advance, something felt off. I had called home the night before, expecting a warm conversation, but Allison had been distant, almost uninterested. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A sharp pain throbbed in my head as I slowly became aware of my surroundings. Dr. Petra was carefully examining my eyes, gently parting my eyelids and pressing the skin around them. Beside her, Nurse Nancy released my wrist after checking my pulse. Their smiles were reassuring, but the news they delivered was unsettling. "You have a concussion," Dr. Petra informed me. According to Allison, I had tripped in the bedroom, fallen backward, and hit my head on the marble floor in the hallway. The thought of it made my stomach turn. I could have died. But despite the severity of the fall, my vital signs were stable, and the concussion, while concerning, was not as critical as it first seemed. As I processed this, the memory of what had happened, or rather, the gaps in my memory, left me uneasy. Dr. Petra observed me carefully, her expression shifting from medical professionalism to quiet concern. "Have you had anything to eat today?" she asked. I hesitated, trying to recall. "No. Not since around 8 o'clock this morning." She nodded, her voice calm but firm. "Since your nausea seems to be more emotional than physical, I strongly recommend that you eat something, especially before your wife returns with the children." I hesitated again, a bitter thought creeping into my mind. "Do you think I'll get sick again, when I see her?" Dr. Petra gave me a reassuring smile. "No, I don't think so." She turned to Nurse Nancy. "Please ask the kitchen to send up a bowl of oatmeal immediately." I sighed. "Can I get cinnamon in it?" Not long after, Allison arrived with the children. They looked relieved to see me awake, though there was an undeniable tension in the room. My son Jerry seemed unfazed, and my youngest appeared to be in good spirits. But Whitney. She stood at a distance, her wide eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. She blinked rapidly and quickly turned away, trying to hide her tears. My heart ached at the sight. After a brief visit, Allison told the kids to wait in the elevator lobby. She lingered behind, making it clear she had something to say. As she approached my bedside, I braced myself. Something was coming. I didn't have the luxury of fully processing my emotions or re-evaluating my response. The scenario playing out in my mind remained unchanged, and I simply had to go along with it. "I can't ask you to lie to her," I told Dr. Petra. "But if she asks, could you at least hint that I'll have to stay until Saturday?" Dr. Petra chuckled. "That I can do. Unless she directly asks me something I'd have to lie about, I'll just let her assume." She glanced at Nurse Nancy. "I'll make sure she's on the same page." After finishing a hearty dinner, I reached out to my parents. Allison had long since cut off communication with them, and at this point the reason seemed painfully obvious. After that, I called my assistant at work, requesting that he bring me a notebook and a pen. There was still unfinished business to take care of. Allison stood beside my hospital bed, her expression unreadable. "We can move on," she murmured, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty. Then, in an unexpected gesture, she took my hand and pressed a kiss to it. I remained completely still, my face betraying nothing. As she stepped away, she gave me a small, almost hesitant wave. But what struck me the most was what she didn't say. Not once did she utter the words, "I love you." Not once did she promise to end her affair with Roger Mayberry. There was no plea for forgiveness, only the faintest trace of regret, not for what she had done, but for having been caught. That was all I needed to confirm what I already knew. The last 10% of my plan still needed to be finalized, but that would be the easiest part. Roger's downfall was inevitable, and I wouldn't be satisfied with a simple punishment. Sure, I could have just demanded his termination, but that wasn't nearly enough. I wanted to dismantle his entire career, ensuring that he wouldn't just walk into another high-paying job in the same field. On the advice of Gail, along with her recommended divorce expert, I had gathered every piece of information necessary. With access to Roger's bank details and professional records, I was in a position to make sure his security clearance was revoked, leaving him unable to find employment with the same salary and status he currently enjoyed. This wouldn't be a slap on the wrist. It would be permanent. During one of my conversations, an unexpected moment occurred. When I casually mentioned that my second child was named Whitney, the person on the other end of the line suddenly fell silent. "You named her Whitney?" came the reply, followed by a deep, disbelieving sigh. I could hear something shift in their tone, something between surprise and realization. I understood exactly what she was thinking, and despite the situation, I saw no harm in bending the truth just a little. "Yes," I said with a grin, "she was named after someone very dear to me before the wedding." The words hit her like a wave. A rush of emotions crossed her face and tears welled up in her eyes. "You scoundrel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've only cried for you twice in the last decade." I chuckled softly, reaching out to take her hand. A single tear escaped, but she quickly brushed it away. As I left Jezebel's office, I couldn't help but smile, feeling an unexpected sense of inspiration. Before stepping out, I took a risk. I leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on her lips. She didn't pull away. Fortunately, shortly after our wedding, Allison had insisted that her credit card accounts be issued solely in her name. At the time, I hadn't given it much thought. But now, with everything that had come to light, I was determined to dig deeper. I knew I could easily find her bank account details within the documents scattered around the house. It wouldn't take long to track down the numbers linked to both her and Roger's accounts, as well as her personal credit cards. That afternoon, Allison called me. Her voice carried an artificial sweetness, a tone I could recognize instantly. "I'm taking the kids out for milkshakes," she said. "We should be home around 5:30 p.m. "Oh, I'll have to cook a nice dinner for you when you get back," she added, trying to sound cheerful. "Don't spoil their dinner," I said flatly. "Thanks for the parenting tips," she replied, forcing a light-hearted tone. "See you at 5:30, I muttered, hanging up before she could say anything else. The moment the kids walked through the door, their energy filled the house. Their faces lit up when they saw me, their voices overlapping as they excitedly shared stories about their day. When I mentioned that we'd take a trip to the store for their favorite treat, milkshakes, their enthusiasm grew tenfold. It was a simple thing, but for them, it meant everything. And for me, it was a rare moment of pure happiness amidst the storm. With a cheerful tone, I turned to my daughters. "So, girls, what do you have planned for Saturday?" I had missed my usual Thursday newscast due to my hospital stay, but by the time we arrived home around 5:20 p.m., all three children were in great spirits. Their energy filled the house, and for a brief moment, everything felt normal. Still, I remained cautious. When Allison greeted me, I subtly ensured that at least one of the kids was always between us. I wasn't ready for any physical contact with her, not yet. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, I retreated to the guest room. "Don't you want to talk?" Allison asked, her voice hesitant as she lingered in the doorway. Ignoring her question, I focused on the task at hand. While playing a game of cards with Whitney and Jerry, Allison approached with a stack of papers in hand. "Darling," she purred, handing them over. I took them without much thought, casually tossing them into my briefcase and continuing the game. At the same time, I made an important call to the CEO of Roger Mayberry's company, requesting a security review of 5 employees in his department. Due to the sensitive nature of their work, such background checks were routine. Just as certain industries require random drug testing, some companies conduct security screenings at their discretion. Employees often assume these procedures are mandated by the government, when in reality, it's their employer initiating them. That night, I turned my attention to another matter. After installing the most advanced password cracking software on my laptop, I connected my device to Allison's computer. Jack, my trusted IT specialist, stood beside me, methodically outlining our plan while keeping his latex gloves on. As the program ran, Jack smirked and started making conversation, suggesting ways to pass the time while we waited. But before he could finish, a sharp beep interrupted him. Curious, I glanced at the screen. "Did something go wrong?" I asked. Jack's grin widened. "Not at all," he assured me. "The password's already been cracked." I stared at him, momentarily stunned by how quickly it had happened. The real work was just beginning. I watched in silence, my stomach twisting as the screen displayed the undeniable truth. Allison, lost in a moment of pure bliss, intimately entwined with Roger Mayberry. I could only endure it for a few minutes before the weight of it became unbearable. Despite the cold satisfaction of knowing this footage would strengthen my case for sole custody of our children, a crushing wave of sadness settled over me. On Friday morning, I took the next step. I uploaded the damning video to a paid website, ensuring it would reach the right audience. To handle the posting discreetly, I wired $5,000 to Jezebel, entrusting her with the task. By Friday evening, the transaction was complete. The money had landed in Allison's account, and the video was now available to paying viewers. By the end of the day, Roger Mayberry sat in an interview, his confidence quickly unraveling. When questioned about whether he had any extracurricular activities that could be used as leverage against him, he initially denied it. But the lie detector told a different story. The expert across from him wasted no time. Without a word, he turned the screen toward Mayberry, playing the incriminating footage. "Care to explain your relationship with this woman?" the interviewer asked. Mayberry's face drained of color. 2 weeks ago, he might have brushed off such a question with a smirk, but now he hesitated, caught between the risks of lying and the consequences of telling the truth. With a deep breath, he finally admitted it. "Allison Banks, isn't she married to your colleague, Brian?" The weight of his words hung in the air. The damage was done. By her side, I knew this would be our final intimate encounter. There was nothing left to salvage. Still, as I watched Allison play along with my teasing, her ability to mask the situation with effortless charm was almost impressive. She grinned, completely unaware of what was coming. I looked her in the eye and told her plainly that I would never sleep with her again, given the possibility of her numerous affairs, especially with Mayberry. The shock on her face was priceless. She stuttered, her cheeks flushing red, demanding to know what I meant. But I didn't offer an explanation. I let her sit with it. The next morning, I helped the kids get ready for school under Allison's icy glare. She said nothing, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut. The moment the kids were out the door, I wasted no time. I made a quick phone call. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again. "There's a man in the parking lot shouting your name," Sherry said. "Should I call the police?" I couldn't help but laugh. "No need," I replied. Without hesitation, I called Jack and told him to get here immediately. The situation was playing out almost too perfectly. When Jack arrived, we went straight to the window, which provided a clear view of the commotion outside. Mayberry was staggering back and forth, clearly intoxicated, making a spectacle of himself. Conveniently, this was one of the best surveilled spots in the entire building, covered by multiple security cameras. Jack slipped out discreetly, knowing exactly what needed to be done. By the time we returned home Sunday evening, I braced for Allison's inevitable outburst. Anticipating the worst, I had already taken precautions, moving valuables and most of my clothing to a secure, temperature-controlled storage facility. If things escalated, I wouldn't be caught off guard. But to my surprise, her reaction wasn't as explosive as I had expected. The kids, still buzzing with excitement from our weekend together, unknowingly softened the atmosphere as they excitedly shared their stories with her. Once they were out of earshot, Allison finally spoke. Her first words weren't a confrontation, nor an apology, but an acknowledgement. She knew I had played a role in exposing her. Her voice was measured, but the weight of the situation was clear. "We won't survive this," she admitted. "But none of us want the kids to know the details, or ever see that video." For once, I agreed with her. Some truths were too damaging to be revealed. "I agree it's best to keep the children in the dark," I said. "What do you think we should do?" Allison hesitated for a moment before responding. "My lawyer recommends that we use an intermediary, preferably a former family court judge, to help us reach an agreement." I nodded, genuinely considering the suggestion. "I'm open to that. I'm willing to discuss sole or joint custody, and you can do the same," she continued. "We let the mediator evaluate the situation, consider the children's preferences, and make a recommendation." Though I doubted Allison's sincerity, she at least appeared willing to follow the process. Since she had already stated she wanted no further contact with Mayberry, she reluctantly agreed to comply with the mediator's conditions. She also consented to avoid discussing the case with the children or attempting to sway their statements. The agreement outlined specific financial terms, including how much she could withdraw from my funds for new housing, whether it be a house, condo, or apartment, if I were granted sole custody and she was required to vacate our home. We spent the entire day finalizing the details, making sure everything was clearly defined. As the court hearing approached, my anxiety grew. While the process had been moving smoothly, the judge made a few comments that put me on edge. It became increasingly apparent that he was leaning toward joint custody. Then, just before the children were set to be interviewed, we received an unexpected proposal. The mediator suggested that we observe the interview via closed-circuit television. The request caught me off guard and I instinctively rejected it. "I'm sorry," I admitted, realizing the implications too late. "I should have thought this through earlier, but this will completely undermine." I stopped myself. The damage was already done. After the interviews, Allison's parents took the children out for a meal, with plans to return them home by 4 p.m. Meanwhile, the mediator, having reviewed everything, was prepared to make a final decision, sooner than either of us had expected. According to the agreement, we had no choice but to accept whatever came next. The judge had another week to finalize his decision, meaning there were no immediate obligations. He didn't even bother to hear the half-hour closing arguments the lawyers had meticulously prepared. Instead, after thoroughly reviewing the evidence and prioritizing the children's well-being, he made his ruling. To mark the outcome, I organized a small gathering for family and close friends. I kept the real purpose of the party a secret from the kids, referring to it only as a communal celebration. However, my 13-year-old daughter Amber was sharp enough to figure it out on her own. Shortly before the guests arrived, she walked into the room, closed the door behind her, and motioned for me to sit down. Without hesitation, she climbed onto my lap, her expression serious as she asked a difficult question. "Why are you asking me this?" I asked gently, studying her face. She smiled knowingly. "I talked to the mediator," she admitted. "And I saw Mom with another man. They were acting too affectionate." That night, my thoughts were still spinning as I met Jezebel. She had a way of igniting something in me, and that evening was no different. Her presence alone nearly drove me insane with desire. As I prepared to leave, I finally voiced something I had been holding back. "Jezebel, I don't know what you see in me, but I enjoy being with you. Do you think there could be something real between us?" She studied me for a moment before responding, her voice soft but certain. "I see you as a kind, generous, and intelligent man," she said. "How about taking me to the resort with you for 3 days starting on the 14th? That way we can figure out if this is something serious. To be honest, I'm tired of casual relationships. I need a man who belongs only to me." She kissed me deeply, then pulled away, closing the door behind her as she left. Outside of our personal connection, Jezebel had also been making strides in her own life. She had launched a successful business selling specialized clothing online. Another sign that she was ready for something more stable, just like I was. A few days passed, and I found myself thinking more and more about Jezebel's words. Was I truly ready for something serious again? The idea of being with someone who wanted exclusivity, who wanted me, not out of convenience but out of genuine desire, was something I hadn't experienced in a long time. On the morning of the 14th, I picked her up as promised. She stepped outside, a small suitcase in hand, her confidence as effortless as ever. The way she looked at me, warm, expectant, made something shift inside me. The drive to the resort was filled with easy conversation and teasing laughter. For once, I didn't feel the weight of my past hanging over me. When we arrived, the place was breathtaking, secluded, luxurious, and exactly what we both needed. That first evening, we sat on the balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Jezebel leaned back in her chair, swirling a glass of wine in her hand. "You're quiet," she noted. "Thinking about Allison?" I shook my head. "No," I admitted. "For the first time in a while, I'm not." She smiled, setting her glass down before shifting closer. "Good," she whispered. The next 3 days felt surreal. No legal battles, no custody disputes, no hidden agendas. Just us. By the time we checked out, I knew this wasn't just a fling, and for the first time in a long time I was okay with that. When we returned home, reality came knocking almost immediately. Allison had sent a series of messages, demanding a conversation. I had no intention of playing into her games, but I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. That evening I met her at a quiet cafe, neutral ground. She arrived looking exhausted, her usual confident air slightly dimmed. "I know you don't owe me anything," she started, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly, "but I need to ask, do you really hate me?" I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. "Hate is a strong word, Allison." She let out a humorless laugh. "I guess that means you don't love me either." For the first time I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, no longing for what we had. Just detachment. "No," I said simply. She nodded as if she already knew the answer. "Then I guess this is it." It already had been. She just hadn't accepted it until now. Over the next few weeks, life finally began to settle. The legal battles were behind me, the arrangements had been finalized, and I had the most important thing: my children. The house felt different without Allison in it, but instead of a painful emptiness, there was peace. No more tension, no more secrets lurking in the corners. Jezebel and I continued seeing each other, though I took things slower than I had in the past. This wasn't about filling a void or seeking distraction. This time I wanted something real. She understood that, never pushing, always letting me take the lead. It was refreshing, something I hadn't realized I needed until now. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat outside, looking up at the sky. Amber quietly stepped onto the porch and sat beside me. "You seem different," she said after a moment. "Different how?" I asked. She shrugged. "Happier. Or maybe just lighter." I smiled, realizing she was right. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." She leaned against my shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good. You deserve to be." For the first time in years I believed it. Life moves forward, sometimes in ways we never expect. I had lost a marriage, but I had gained clarity. I had been betrayed, but I had also been set free. And in the end, that was all I needed. The past would always be there, a story that had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was ready to start again. The end.